All
Okay,
right.
so yesterday we did a live talking about if your marketing company can get you in trouble, addressing doctor's offices. Unfortunately, yesterday night our audio was actually pretty bad, and so we were doing it to make sure that we don't sound bad, because audio is important. So, let me introduce myself. My name's Joe Hopshot. I've been doing cosmetic marketing for a very long time, over a decade, since 2004 actually. As you can hear from my accent, I sound funny, which means, some people say I sound like the Terminator. I'm originally from Germany. I've got in contact with HIPAA and marketing at the beginning of 2007, end of 2006. I'm not sure exactly when it was. I just remember that I got a call from a doctor client of mine, and he said, "Joe, you got to fire your assistant." And I'm like, "What? She's good." And he said, "Well, let me tell you the story. I just had a patient call the office, and she said her boyfriend told her that she was going to the plastic surgeon, and she didn't want her boyfriend to know this. And the way that happened is that that boyfriend was the ex-boyfriend of my assistant, and my assistant had seen that she went there, and so she mentioned it. And that was for me a pretty quick flash to that I knew that patient privacy is something that I have to watch as a marketing company. Now, Kristen, you also have some experience with HIPAA that goes way back, right?
Yeah, so I'm Kristen Rushman, and I've been a nurse for about 20 years. Most of the time I've spent working in hospitals. And so, of course, I've had HIPAA training on an annual basis for my entire career. And then I moved into healthcare IT. So I've been doing project management for healthcare organizations who are moving to electronic medical records. So, of course, consumer privacy and all of the other federal regulations and state and, hospital policies, they all come into play. So I've been working with executive leadership on compliance related issues for about 12 years now.
So, the headline of our presentation today is like, can your marketing company get you in trouble? Now, I'm a marketer. Can I get my doctor in trouble?
Absolutely. Absolutely. The laws have changed in the last 5 years, so there's lots to talk about there.
Okay, so I'm just, why would I even consider HIPAA as an issue? I'm just grading leads, those, and I've talked to marketers lately, and they just have the same reaction that I had originally, is like, these are just leads. Why would they? They're not patients. Why would they have any privacy rights?
Yeah, I've heard all kinds of myths and misconceptions around that. So the law is very clear when it comes to the question of, are leads actually considered under the HIPAA regulations? Are they, because they're not patients yet. But the law is really clear, and it specifies that it applies to past, present, and future provision of healthcare or payment for healthcare services. So I always tell people my 7-year-old could read that portion of the law and understand that future patients count. What makes that unique for marketing, and I, when I went into marketing, I had this issue too. I thought this just doesn't make sense to me. But the more I dug into it with my lawyers, I was able to figure out that when someone opts in to an ad for a product or a service related to your healthcare client, they are essentially raising their hand as a potential future patient. And because the information that they give you is connected with that healthcare client, we now all of a sudden have the perfect recipe for protected health information.
Okay, so since we have prepared this, let me pull up the presentation and we'll just go through it. One of the issues that I see right now is you sometimes freeze up. You've got to talk a little bit faster.
Freezing.
But
Chilly.
but it's probably the internet connection. This morning there may be too many people um, on the net. But let me pull up the presentation and then we can just go through this. Let me share my screen. Hopefully this time it will go over immediately. So, can you, well, we probably should check Facebook and see if the screen is visible, but it probably is. Here my screen now just says is can your marketing company get you in trouble with HIPAA? And one thing that we want to talk about is some common misconceptions that are in the market, and this misconception comes from doctors and it comes from the marketers as well. Basically, and that's the picture that I put on there is, you don't want to hear it. And one of the misconceptions we started talking about is that, me as a marketer, I say, well, leads are not protected health information. And you started explaining why leads are protected health information. What would you say to a doctor or a marketer that says they're not?
Well, so a lead is someone who gives you their personal contact information in exchange for information or a voucher or something related to a healthcare product or service. So when they put in one or more of these three things, name, email address, phone number, those three things, any of those things actually are three of the 18 different types of protected health information. And what makes an email address or a name or a phone number or any combination of those protected health information isn't just the fact that it's a name or an email address or a phone number. It's the fact that it was given in the context of a healthcare provider offer for a product or service. And so that connection, it's uniquely identifiable personal information, and then it's also connected with the healthcare provider. So that's the key right there, is when you're opting in to one of those offers, you are, in effect, as a marketer, you're creating protected health information every time someone opts into that offer.
So what you're saying is that even if it is as simple as a name and an email address, it's still protected.
Even if it's as simple as an email address, because it's given in that context.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, there is an example that I tried to pull out to make people realize that this isn't a joke. The law doesn't specify really if you're a dentist or if you're a chiropractor and your services aren't high emotional intensity, but let me give you an example, and as a woman you'll immediately understand this. The example that I just brought up right in the beginning of this is a lot of women don't want their family, their husbands, their boyfriends to know that they're going to a plastic surgeon and signing up for a consultation. They expect that to be private. If you're a guy, I've marketed a urologist and I stepped into the urologist's office. There were 50 people sitting in there, most of them older men. And, once you're over 50 as a man, you know that the likelihood that you have some problems with your prostate are high. But, to increase the emotional intensity, the guy wanted me over because he wanted to market another procedure, and that was penile implants. Now, if you are somebody and you look into a list of leads and you're happening to do a local doctor and you have some of that high sensitivity in these procedures, and then you see a friend sign up for a consultation, that, it's absolutely understandable that you want that protected, that you can't just say, okay, this is not privacy concerns.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, to give another example, I just thought of while you were talking, and it's a personal example. I have had like 3 UTIs this year. And every time I have one, my husband gets all in my face about it and says, what's going on? You need to go in and do some further checking or talk to somebody about why this keeps happening to you. And so the last time that I had one, I literally didn't tell him. And I just went in and, got the peed in the cup and found out what it was. And I got the antibiotics and I didn't say a word. And it wasn't like, a UTI is not that big of a deal, urinary tract infection.
Yeah.
In the scheme of penile implants and breast augmentations, it probably is kind of further down on the list.
But you still expect that it's private, right? Even though you may not be a patient yet, you still expect privacy from it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a nurse. I like to self-diagnose and self-treat, and I don't want family members who don't know anything clinically to come and ask me a whole bunch of questions about simple stuff that I kind of just want to deal with it on my own, you know? And so, and then the other example I was going to tell you, there's a person that I worked with recently who came up to me, I guess because I'm, you know, this HIPAA person, and so they asked me all these questions, but they came up and they said, you know, my spouse received a bill for some therapy sessions that this person had gone to. And they're like, is that okay? And I'm like, no, you your spouse doesn't need to know that you're going to therapy. I mean, that's obviously a personal issue between you and your spouse, but it was totally unacceptable that the bill arrived to the other person's name. So
Yeah.
it's things like that, you know.
So there is a term that doctors and medical providers are probably familiar with, and that's called a business associate. What's a business associate?
So a business associate is someone who is basically coming in contact, even creating, like we talked about with the leads, with PHI on behalf of something called a covered entity, which would typically be the provider, the doctor, right? The dentist, the chiropractor, the plastic surgeon. And so if I, as a marketer, am contracted to this client, this doctor client, to bring in leads, then by definition, I'm what's called a business associate because I am doing one or more of the four things. Basically, I'm creating, transmitting, receiving, or maintaining, which is like storing protected health information.
So when a marketer like me says I'm not a business associate, you know, that's false, right?
Right. And it's a fairly new false because this wasn't really something that the government was managing too terribly much up until the omnibus rule took effect, which was in September of 2013. So about 5 years ago is when this became front and center. And so now, all of a sudden, if you're a business associate, the government considers you equally accountable and holds you equally liable for the parts of HIPAA that apply to business associates, period. So that's a pretty big change. And there might be, you know, many marketers or even many providers out there who are not necessarily familiar with that change. So it's a big deal.
So what it basically means is that when a marketer says, you know, I don't have to be HIPAA compliant, you know, that's false too. Marketer has to be HIPAA compliant, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you're, like I said, if you're creating, transmitting, receiving, or maintaining PHI. So if you're doing lead generation, you know, there's just no way of getting around it.
Well, just what about somebody who just does a video at a doctor's office? Is that something, you know?
Well, I guess it would depend on what the video was of, right? Because if there's any patients in the background of that video, whether you intended for them to be there or not, then now you're still dealing with protected health information, and there's some rules around how you would need to make that happen.
Okay, so you know you can't just as a doctor just hire anybody off the street. You're gonna have to make sure that they're HIPAA compliant, or you know, are there other options? Could you just, you know, get the kid down the street to generate some Facebook leads for you?
I wouldn't recommend that, just because you know, a lot of the doctors that are watching this, I'm sure, are very well aware of what HIPAA is. There's not a lot of explaining that has to happen there. But in the context of social media marketing and, you know, getting video testimonials or, you know, patient experiences that you can use in your marketing, things like that, all of a sudden, the rules really apply to this, like I said. So it's something that they need to be aware of, and it's something that they know how to ask good quality questions around. And when you're looking for somebody to, you know, do your social media marketing or help you with patient testimonials or help you with social media management, you know, posting and comments and all that kind of stuff, or even just design your website, there are an awful lot of things that need to be considered. So the guy down the street or your cousin, you know, Tim, who's just getting started in marketing and wants to help you out with, you know, getting a website and some ads going, might not be your best choice. You know, that's something.
But you know, let me just throw this in there. What could happen? You know, I'm too small. You know, they got bigger fish to fry than, you know, this two-doctor practice and this starting marketer, right?
Well, that is another common misconception. I noticed you listed it as the biggest. It probably is one of the biggest misconceptions that I hear, because the idea that I'm too small and the government has, bigger fish to fry, as you put it, there's an assumption behind that statement that says that the government only goes after people that they choose, right? That they somehow, I don't know, like have a map on the wall and they throw darts at it and they decide which, companies or organizations they're going to go after, which is not how this works. The majority of the investigations that occur are not because the government just chose to come after somebody. It's because there was a complaint filed or there was a breach of some sort that had to be reported. Whether you want to or not, sometimes that kind of stuff just gets bigger than you intend. And so you're basically one complaint away or one breach away from a HIPAA investigation.
Well, one thing that, me talking to other marketers, it was a pretty hefty reaction that I got. And one guy even said, so what do you mean? The doctors can't do marketing, or I can't create leads for doctors? What's the reality here? Are doctors able to do good marketing or not?
Yeah, absolutely. It's really just understanding what the regulations require and then applying those to what I would call good marketing skills and practices. And so the goal is to not break your marketing. The goal is to continue to do what the good marketer does, but to do it within these guidelines.
There's one thing though that every doctor needs, right? They need a business associate agreement with the marketer.
Yeah, and there's a couple of questions people ask me pretty routinely when they hear about HIPAA. What comes to mind is, I need some kind of a document, right? There has to be some kind of a document, an agreement between me and the client. And that's true. That's called a business associate agreement. And the client, the provider, is required to have a business associate agreement with the marketer who's doing the lead gen for him or her. And so that would be the number one thing to start talking about.
So it's just a piece of paper, or is there something else?
It's just a piece of paper. It's got like a cartoon drawing on it.
So, do I just need my marketer to sign this business associate agreement, or is there more to it?
Yeah, there's some specific requirements that need to be in that document. There's some optional things that could be in the document, but most importantly, it's not about just the document. It's about the doctor, the client, the practice owner, understanding what it takes to do technical due diligence. What do I need to ask my marketer so that I know that this agreement isn't just a piece of paper, that it's actually something that they can and will and are complying with, because that's my responsibility as a practice owner.
So I, as a doctor, have to know what to ask that marketer in order to make sure that they can actually protect my PHI?
Well, yeah, I mean, you have to make sure they can actually do what's written in the document. Otherwise, the document is sort of without purpose.
Okay. But, so from the reality check perspective, you would say that a marketer needs to be fully HIPAA compliant then? Or are there options for them to just, not be HIPAA compliant?
Well, that's like saying I'm going to diet, but I'm only going to, some of the foods that I like to eat, I'm still going to have, right? I mean, you need to be compliant. The rules are the rules. There's no gray area. There are all kinds of requirements related to HIPAA that need to be in place. And so marketers need to be HIPAA compliant. And that's the practice owner's responsibility to make sure that that document lines out exactly what their agreements are related to how that's going to happen, and then follows through with due diligence to understand how the marketer is going to meet those requirements.
Now that is one thing that we offer to our group members, right? When they apply to become part of our HIPAA and marketing group, we are actually sending out a document to the practice owners with a checklist and a questionnaire that they can ask the marketers, so that they can make sure that the marketer understands that HIPAA compliance is important.
Absolutely. The goal of our group, one of the main goals, is to equip the practice owner with the knowledge and expertise to be able to go out and not just find a marketer that can do the marketing, but to understand how to ask the right questions to determine whether they can do the marketing compliantly.
Now, there's when you think about these HIPAA issues and you see that all these fines are happening and that there is complaints left and right, when you think about how are these guys from HHS and OCR doing this, they have to investigate every complaint, right? There is a congressional mandate that they can't just turn a blind eye. And if you think about what you would do if you had this stack of complaints, you'd look at the public face of that company first, right? And that's the marketing.
Well, I think they probably have lots of things that they look at, but it would make sense that they would look at your online presence for two reasons. Number one, any human being on the planet who has access to a computer, what's the thing we do when we're trying to find information on something? We Google search it, right? I mean, it just makes sense that one of the tools they're going to use is your online presence. But the second thing that is, I would call it a little known fact, is probably not even known at all to the general public, but HHS OCR came out with some information earlier this year that they are going to be looking to provide guidance on social media. So that's a pretty big deal. If they're looking to provide guidance on social media related to HIPAA, you can bet that they're doing their due diligence right now to understand all of the sort of, difficulties around being online and being a practice owner or a healthcare organization. And so it just makes sense that they're looking at those things when they're determining, what the extent of the investigation needs to be. So if you have an online presence that is basically broadcasting that you're not compliant, even on your website or on your Facebook page, then you can just imagine what they would find underneath all of that. It's a pretty easy.
But what can be wrong with the website? There's one thing that we've listed here is the chance of an audit. Why does a website have to be HIPAA compliant?
Right. Well, because again, it goes back to the past, present, and future patients, right? So most practice owners are going to have a website with a contact form on it. Some go further than that, and they have, schedule an appointment options on there. And so if you're collecting contact information, whether it's a name, an email address, and or a phone number, any combination of those in the context of that person requesting information on your product or service, or going further and even looking to schedule an appointment with you, clearly they are calling themselves out as a future patient. So it doesn't matter whether it's an ad that they're opting into or a contact form that they're filling out. All of those things fall under future patient and therefore fall under HIPAA.
Now, what I as a marketer want the listeners to understand is that places like GoDaddy or most other smaller shared hosting companies are not compliant. What that also means is that probably most websites designed by local companies are hosted on non-compliant servers. That's a big issue. One thing that we mentioned before is that when you look at websites, some of them don't even have a secure certificate on them, right?
Oh, that was so shocking. Yeah, when we started looking at websites, and we've looked at hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of websites, when we started looking at them, I was truly shocked at how many, I would say at least a third, if not more, of the practice owner websites we've looked at aren't even secure. I mean, just off the get-go, the website itself doesn't even have SSL turned on. It's crazy.
Yeah. And in order to go to the initial question is, can a marketer get a doctor's office in trouble? That would be the first thing, right? If the website is basically hosted in a non-HIPAA compliant way on the web.
Mm-hmm.
The second part,
of it,
a
couple of complaints on your desk.
Yeah.
You're going to go through your own sort of little 10-point check to see, where do I go with all these complaints? And the obvious thing you're going to do is get on the computer and start checking some things out.
Yeah. Yeah, we have a checklist that we go through to check web presences. We're going to provide that to our group members as well, right?
Yeah, we do a 10-point audit for people. We're happy to do that for someone if they want that done. And there's 6 basic things that people usually are doing with their websites that are direct or potential violations. And there's 4 basic things that we see with Facebook pages for the practice owner that are also direct or potential violations. And then if they're running ads, we can take a look at, from the patient's perspective, we can take a look at what is going on there, and we can probably come up with a few more suggestions for improvement.
Now, what often happens today is that somebody who starts in marketing goes to a doctor's office and suggests to do a 7-day or 10-day, free trial where they just generate leads for the doctor. We've already talked about that. That probably should be a red flag, that no doctor's office should do this unless that marketer is actually HIPAA compliant. But once these guys are then getting successful, what we have also seen across the internet is that they use the doctor's data to get other doctors. They actually show off PHI to get other doctors.
Yeah, because again, most marketers out there don't realize, that what they're doing is even non-compliant. So yeah, they'll show, spreadsheets of leads, and they might block out things like a name or a phone number, but they don't block out all of the PHI identifiers on the spreadsheet. And they're scrolling it across the screen and sending it out to the masses to basically say, look at me, I'm a great marketer. Look how many leads I was able to get this guy. And, shocking, like for people to understand what's actually happening there. We just kind of cringe when we see that. We've seen some other things, though.
Yeah, some video guys using patient photos in their marketing. Which,
yeah.
It seems like crazy that a doctor's office would allow this, or but probably, and that's one of the biggest problems. Such as I'd made a post this morning, is one of the biggest problems that we have with our service is awareness. A lot of doctors' office marketers don't know that they can't do this because some of this is very common in other areas, and it's good marketing. It's not bad marketing. You just can't do it in healthcare.
Yeah, when you're a marketer and you're not used to, federal requirements coming into play with what you're doing when it comes to HIPAA, you don't know that showing a fantastic shot of you inside a provider's office, with your video guy, doing like some action shots of things that are going on in the office. You don't realize that that is protected health information. And so it's one thing to use it in the context of your agreement with that client with, all the right stuff in place, of course, to make that okay. But it's a whole nother thing to say, look at me, look at this action shot of me doing my great work with this client. Wouldn't you like to also be my client so I can do these things for you too? I mean, that is a problem.
Yeah, and what has happened, and we're going to go through some of these fines, is basically a prospective or a patient that files a complaint on the doctor because their likeness, their picture, their video showed up in some marketing of some company that they didn't even know, a marketing company, a TV station, or something like that.
Yeah, and Joe, consumer privacy is kind of a trend right now. For a couple of reasons. I mean, this year when Facebook spent so much time in Washington because of the Cambridge Analytica, scandal, as they called it on the news, right? So consumer privacy became front and center with all of that going on. And that went on for how long? Weeks, months? I don't remember, but it was a big deal. And then with the Anthem, HIPAA violations that just came out, I want to say a week or two ago, over 79 million Americans were affected. We're talking 1 in 4 Americans are getting letters and notifications from Anthem that basically says your consumer privacy was compromised from a PHI standpoint. So you can turn and look at 5 people around you, and 1 or 2 of those people are probably going to know what you're talking about. Yeah. That's a concern.
And basically, when you talk to somebody about HIPAA, and they're not in the medical field, that's the things that they say. We got a letter from Blue Cross or from Anthem a couple of years ago, and everybody in our family was affected. So people aren't just ignorant about this. They know they have rights, and they are. Sometimes you even see questions on the internet is, where can I go and complain?
Yeah, which is not difficult to do.
Yeah,
Filing a complaint for a HIPAA violation is probably one of the easier things someone could do on the internet.
yeah. And and if you have a marketing company that is non-HIPAA compliant, that marketing company probably also uses non-compliant tools to follow up. And sends you the leads in a fashion that is unencrypted, which is against HIPAA. Now, this is very common in other industries. Is actually a good way of delivering the leads, but if your marketer doesn't know about HIPAA compliance, he's also going to use tools that aren't compliant. Now, if your marketer is compliant, he can only use the tools that are compliant, right?
Yes. When they are creating, transmitting, receiving, or maintaining PHI, absolutely. Those tools need to be compliant too. So the compliance is going to spread its way throughout the entire marketing set of tools and workflows.
Yeah, and it goes down the chain, right? Because now that the marketer is compliant, he also needs to make sure that his subcontractors are compliant, right?
Yep. And subcontractors could be, the videographer that you contract with to come in and do shoots for you once in a while, or it could be
The web
the tools
hoster.
that you're using. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And
Now,
that's that whole omnibus rule again back in September of 2013. It brought business associates right up to the top of the pile with the clients, with the covered entities, and now everybody's held accountable all the way down the chain. So it's not just between the client and the marketer anymore. It's between the client and the marketer, and then down the chain from that as well. If the marketer has subcontractors, including software vendors that are involved in coming in contact with PHI.
now, if we have a practice watching this, I want to ask the question, do you have a business associate agreement with your marketing company in place? And have you done your due diligence? Have you made sure that your marketing company is HIPAA compliant? Now, you are required by the law to have these measures in place. If you don't have these measures in place, you better hurry up and get them in place because you're exposing yourself to huge fines, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And what matters. And so, the government is looking for what they call due diligence, and their fines are assessed based on the level of culpability. So what you knew and what you did about it, or what you could have known had you done due diligence to look into it, and what you did about it.
Now, my clients, the plastic surgeons, are probably going to call this fine here peanuts. There's like a $31,000 fine for not having a business associate agreement that was published by the Office of Consumer Rights. Can you say
Office for Civil. Yeah.
for civil consumer rights, civil rights? Yeah, OCRHS. Hard to pronounce for German.
Yeah, but that $31,000 fine, that's peanuts. That's a great example just to kind of wet people's whistle a little bit about what could happen. But not having a BAA is not just a $31,000 fine. And it really depends on the investigator and, again, your level of culpability. What did you know and what did you do about it? What could you have known had you tried? And what did you do about it? And also, they can go back 6 years and they can look at the same violation type over and over and over again and fine you over and over and over again. I mean, I've seen that same exact violation. It's a simple document. I didn't have the document in place. I got fined $31,000, but the next guy, same thing, got fined $750,000. Now, in the resolution agreements, the government doesn't just sort of spell out all of the math behind the number. There's just a number. So we will never know exactly what played into the 31 versus 750,000. What was the difference? But I can tell you from looking at the two resolution agreements that we're just talking about right now, that the violation type was exactly the same.
Now, if I have a marketing company and my marketing is really good and it works, and that marketing company has created 1,000 leads for me in the last year, and I don't have a business associate agreement in place, what are the implications of that?
Well, that's a serious problem. I mean, that could be anything from impermissible disclosure. I mean, that is absolutely at minimum impermissible disclosure, which, you have some things you got to deal with on that one, but it could also be considered a breach depending on a bit of a risk assessment that would need to be done. And so potentially, especially once you get, over 500 leads, now you've entered the realm of the over 500 category for a breach. And you're not just reporting that kind of thing to the patients and the government, because once you're over 500, now you got to report it to the media. And you have certain time frames with which to do it in. If you're not doing that within your 60-day window for all three of those entities, there's multipliers that come into play when it comes to assessing fines, not just in addition to, but multiplied by.
Mm-hmm. And so basically what that means is I got to hurry up and get this business associate agreement in place if I don't have it in place. But it could also mean that my reputation is shot if I have to report this. So could I just not report it? There is a fine that I just put up on the screen where somebody decided that that was the best way of dealing with this.
They were a little bit late in reporting. Yes, they were. I want to say it ranged anywhere from like 9 to 11 days past the 60-day mark, depending on whether you're talking about the patients or the governor or the media. But all of those became multipliers. And this was a true settlement right here. I mean, that number could have been significantly larger, but it sounds like they were able to work out some things in the course of that investigation.
Yeah, and this was actually a surgery schedule that was lost. And they just decided not to report it, and then somebody else found it, and it turned into a complaint. And usually when you do something like that, it's not only the fine that you also have to notify the patients, and that's hundreds of dollars, to notify each patient. And in addition to that, your loss of reputation that you have. And in addition to that, often what you also then end up doing is it's a class action lawsuit because lawyers are out there looking for these things, right?
There could be civil fines, and then there's also the expense of not just reporting it to the patients, and that could be way more than hundreds of dollars depending on how many we're talking about, but there's also the expense of the credit monitoring service that you would offer for a year. I mean, there's so many things that come into play, so it's not just the fine. There's a whole lot of money wrapped around that. To address the situation. Now,
we know that if you don't have a marketing company that's HIPAA compliant, there's things that can happen that just happen because out of negligence. There's an example here that just happened. On September 20th, 2018, there was a settlement published for $999,000. I mean, I'm not really sure why they didn't just call it $1 million, but they must have had their reasons for it. But this is an ABC documentary series where basically 3 hospitals were involved, and this was actually something good. But they didn't have authorizations in place by the patients whose images they showed.
Yeah, and I don't know that they were thinking so much about that. People were in the background, right? I mean, they were doing the shoot, people were in the background, and unfortunately, that's a violation. If there's patient images or even partial images, anything that's identifiable in the background of what it is you're intending to do, then that's a HIPAA violation.
So do the patients have to file that complaint, or can anybody file that complaint?
So anybody can file the complaint. It could be a disgruntled patient. It could be a disgruntled employee. It could be a bystander who saw what was happening and knew that there was an issue. It could be a competitor, let's be honest. And or it could be, there's whistleblower laws in the United States that actually come into play here. And there are people who find that it's a good way to make a living, apparently. And so they can be a whistleblower for things like this. The guy that was standing there watching that, I don't know who reported it or how it was found out, but that would potentially be a whistleblower situation. Somebody could have made themselves a cool $250,000 off of that one.
Yeah. or a lot more of the next one. That's also a situation where a hospital invited a TV crew into the hospital and into an emergency room.
Yeah.
So we went pretty quick from peanuts to substantial fines, and the size of the practice here doesn't really matter, right?
No, it doesn't. It absolutely doesn't.
Now, in order to get HIPAA compliant with your marketing, you can't just have a business associate agreement. You also need to have your technical due diligence, and that's one thing that we offer in our group. If you sign up, or if you get into our free Facebook group and you put in your practice address and your email address, we're actually going to email out you a check or email you out a checklist and a questionnaire that you can ask your marketing company to actually make sure that they can comply with HIPAA, because you're required to do your due diligence. Now, what you also get if you get into our Facebook group, you get access to the entire educational series. Obviously, it's not just this first session that we do. There's additional sessions where we're going to go a little bit deeper, trying to explain what's necessary, right?
Absolutely. The idea of the group is to bring practice owners together and equip them with the knowledge and empower them with the ability to go out and make sure they know how to find somebody who can do this for them right.
Yeah, it's not that we want to kill marketing, right? That's not the idea. What we want to do is we want to help to clean up this industry by having marketing that's compliant and that continues to work. We don't want to go after marketers or doctors. What we want is we want to help doctors and marketers to actually follow the law and do good marketing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's how I got kind of sucked into this whole thing. When I first started going into marketing, I tried really hard to stay away from healthcare because I knew HIPAA was going to be a big deal, and I just didn't really have the time or the inclination to put into figuring out what it was going to take. And there was nobody like this. I mean, I did some research and I tried to figure out where I could go to get this information, and there wasn't anybody. And a friend of mine asked for some help with marketing. She happens to be in healthcare. And although I tried desperately not to agree to do that, she was my best friend, and that just happened. So I went out and got myself a couple of lawyers and equipped myself with the knowledge. And basically what we want to do with this group is share that knowledge with people and help to equip them, because there's just not great avenues out there for getting this done.
Now, if you want to join the group, I'm not sure what exactly where we're going to post this thing later, but there's a Learn More button somewhere on this page, and you can join the group, or the group links are going to be in the comments of this Facebook post. There's actually 3 groups that we have. Kristen has a group that teaches marketers how to be HIPAA compliant, right?
Yep, HIPAA compliant secrets. If you just look it up on Facebook and then request to join, answer a couple of questions, let me know a little bit about you. And
so why did you call it secrets? What's secret?
Because there's so many regulations. There's 52 parts of the security rule, and it can get really overwhelming. But I have what I would like to call some secrets for how to apply those to social media marketing, and you can get kind of clever with it. So
right now we're like 42 minutes in. You say that there's more to know?
Have you seen how long the rule is?
But we can't explain the entire rule. That's not necessary either, right? What we want to do is we want to try to pull out what's necessary in order to keep the marketing compliant, to make the front door look like it is compliant. One thing that we know from the government's statistics is that a lot of practices fail their audit.
Yeah. The goal here would be not to force somebody to understand HIPAA in all of its entirety. The goal would be to take the parts of it that apply and help you to kind of figure out how you're going to apply it to your particular situation.
Yeah, and one of the sessions that we want to do is also a session on what actually causes HIPAA audits, how that happens. One thing that we want to say is that what you don't know can hurt you, and that's the goal of our group, our Facebook group, that we actually educate you on what you need to know in order to keep the marketing compliant. There is some sessions that we're going to do public like this so that everybody can access them. Others are not going to be public. They're just going to be in the group. So if you go to the group, you apply to get into that group as a practice owner. You can get into this group, and Kristen's group, that's for marketers. And I also have a group that's for cosmetic doctors, where we actually teach how to get cosmetic procedures um, in a HIPAA compliant way with good marketing. So on both sides, we're going to go very intense into it, but this group that we're going to post these things in is basically for practice owners that are interested in keeping their good marketing working. And we've seen some fantastic marketing, right? Except some of the stuff is just not allowed in healthcare.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean that we need to break the marketing to be compliant either.
Yeah. Yeah, and and that is one of the sessions that we're going to go through. Is where we're just going to go through the issue of can good marketing increase your chance of a HIPAA audit? And the short answer to this, it definitely can if you do it wrong. If you do it right, it can be compliant and it can be good marketing. Another session that we're going to have is social media marketing and HIPAA. What is allowed? That's actually a pretty sticky topic. Social media. The hallmark of success there is engagement. But as a medical marketer, you have a slew of precautions that you have to take in order to actually do social media right. Right? Can we summarize that in one sentence here, or do you think we're going to need another 20 minutes to talk about that?
I think that's a whole nother session right there.
And when we looked across the internet, how often do you see social media marketing done wrong?
The better question would be how often have I seen it done right, and I haven't.
Yeah.
I really.
And that's kind of scary, isn't it?
It's a rare, it's a rare Facebook page that's actually compliant.
Yeah. And another session is, and we talked to a marketer who actually has a fantastic follow-up system trying to reduce no-shows and no responses by prospects. And he's sending emails and SMS messages, and so we want to analyze that. What does it mean, SMS and email? Email and text message are unencrypted forms of communications. The question is, can medical marketers do that? And the answer to that is yes, but there are several conditions to fulfill, and we're going to talk about that. One thing that we also want to talk about, because we hear that all the time, and that is too small to get fried. I actually like that sentence, because that's such a common misconception, that where people assume how they could get audited, and does the size of the practice matter? And I think that biggest misconception actually comes from a time where HIPAA was just for large hospitals and insurance companies, right?
Right.
Before 2013.
Yeah, I mean, HIPAA has evolved quite substantially from insurance portability to consumer privacy related to protected health information. So we'll have to get into that on that session.
Yeah. And one of the other sessions that we want to do is we want to talk about tools. And that's one of the most interesting questions we get all the time is what marketing tools are HIPAA compliant. Now this session we're not going to do in public because this is actually something where a lot of the tools that are near and dear to ourselves could feel that we're not being nice to them, but it needs to be talked about. Tools like Messenger bots, Aweber, Mailchimp, Constant Contact. What is allowed there? What can the medical marketer use? And that's going to be just in our group.
And we're not going after any particular vendors. We just want to make sure that people understand of the various tools that are out there that marketers know and love, what do each of them offer in terms of HIPAA compliance or not?
Yeah. Okay, and that is basically the end of the presentation, so I think I'm going to go back to the camera. So, hey, we're back on screen. So for today, that's basically going to be all. We're going to do a couple more sessions in the future, and they're going to be in our group. So I encourage everybody that watches this to get into the Facebook group, because what you don't know can hurt you, right?
Yeah, what you don't know can hurt you. Now, How are they supposed to get into the group, Joe? Are you posting a link or something?
Yeah, there's going to be a link at the bottom of this, and also if you go to our website, 11doctors.com, there is actually a button to go to the Facebook group directly. And this video actually is going to be on the front of the 11doctors.com website as well. So we're going to make it easy. So somewhere in the neighborhood of this video is going to be a way to get to the group. Now, if somebody steals this video, then of course not.
I'll post the link to my HIPAA compliant secrets group in the comments as well. If anyone on the marketing side is interested in hearing more about what it takes to be compliant, would love to have you in the group.
Okay, so I guess that's it for today, and we're going to talk to some of you later. Hopefully, it was educating. I hope we didn't bore too many people. I know sometimes if it's not your type of subject, then it may be boring. But that's it for today, so talk to you later.
All right.